All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining this morning. My name is Julie Sullivan, and I do the mentor training and support for the Quivira Coalition New Agrarian Program. And this is the third, I believe, call in the series that we do every fall and winter for our new mentors, but we also open these calls up to people from other programs. And today we have people both from our program as well as from other programs. So my comments will try to be phrased so that they're pertinent to people, whether or not they're part of the NAP program or not. So with that said, today's call is focusing on interviewing. And there are a couple of reasons why this call feels like a really important one to me, which is that I think in the call last month, we talked about how beneficial it is for you to really think about what your criteria is before you start reading applications so that you give everyone a really fair opportunity to make their case that they're a good person for you. But it's also important for you to be able to take into account all of the things that you need this year. And sometimes it's particular skill sets. Sometimes it's actually a certain degree of flexibility and adaptability because you know that your operation is going through a lot of transition or is taking on new projects. So you know that it's not going to be the same old thing, and you're going to be thinking on your feet a lot, and you want someone who's going to be comfortable with that. So the interview is the opportunity then to obviously try to learn whether or not the information you gleaned from the applications does seem to be a good read on who this person is, and try to get deeper and more thorough information in the course of the interview. It's also true that some of the things we might feel like we want to know, like how old someone is or their physical capacity, are actually questions we legally can't ask. So one of the things we'll talk about in the call this morning is how can you frame an interview in such a way that you stay within the legal parameters of what you can and cannot ask, and yet still try to learn everything you can in order to make a good choice, and in order for you to disclose all the information you need to, so that the person you're interviewing can also determine whether or not they have the capacity to do the job that you're offering. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, which is always exciting for me because it doesn't always work. Here we go. There. Can you all see that? Yes, no, maybe? Can people see it?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay. All right. Once I go into screen share, it's hard for me to actually see all of your little pictures, so I don't necessarily see head nods. Sometimes I need a verbal confirmation, so thank you. So one of the things I wanted to start with was what our timeline is in our program. And this may or may not be pertinent for you if you are not part of the NAP program. But because we have mentors on our call, it is important for me to review this information. So the NAP process from application opening to actually finalizing your decision and offering your position to somebody is actually pretty extended. And there are reasons for that. Part of it is that we're going over the winter holiday period of time when it's difficult for people to be doing a lot of email or doing interviews or such. But because most of our mentors want their apprentice to arrive on site sometime, usually by early to mid-March, sometimes late March, early April. Nonetheless, what that means is that they want to be making job offers ideally by the beginning of February, so that that young person has 3 or 4 weeks in order to be able to give notice at their job, pack up their lives, because our program is residential. Apprentices are usually relocating. And for them to have several weeks in order to go through that process really helps them get off to a good start. So that's one of the reasons why our process is so extended. So for us, our applications open November 1st and they'll close on December 15th. That's a 6-week window that applications are open. I know that right now, some of our mentors have a fair number of applications that have come in, and some of our mentors have very few. That's not unusual. There are usually a handful of applications that come in right away. And then a lot of people wait until the last minute to submit. And it isn't necessarily because they're procrastinating. It's because they're doing edits. They're really trying to make a good case for why they're the person you want to hire. And so don't be surprised if you get a flurry of applications right there around December 13, 14, 15. That's pretty common. That said, if you don't have enough applications on December 15th for you to feel like you've got a good sort of suite of people to choose from for your interviews, we can keep your application open on what they call a rolling close, which means we'll just keep the application open until you do feel like you have enough applicants. Yeah, every year there are at least a few mentors who decide to do that. So don't be, too alarmed if right now you don't have a whole lot of people applying. I know for us, we right now only have one application, and usually we have about 20. So I'm not hyperventilating yet, but I might start in about a week. So once your applications hit that closing date, that December 15th, we recommend that if you haven't started to read and review your applications, you do start on December 15th with the goal of trying to pick ideally no more than 6 people you want to do an initial video or phone interview with. We sort of pick that 4 to 6 people number because if you're going to do a really thorough interview with people, it takes a fair amount of energy to do your preparation and actually do the interview, and trying to do more than 6 can be really difficult to fit in. So ideally that 4 to 6 number, you can do more if you want. I don't recommend that you do less than 4 because your top 2 or 3 people are probably also applying to other mentor sites and other jobs, and they may actually pick a job other than you. So if you've only done first interviews with a handful of people, you may end up having to kind of start over, which doesn't always feel like it's very timely or helpful. So review your applications. You create an interview schedule for those first video interviews. If you're a new mentor in our program, you are required to have a NAP staff person on the call with you. And that isn't because they're going to be policing your interview. It's really because there are programmatic elements that NAP provides that aren't part of what the apprentice is doing on the mentor site. And to have a NAP staff person there in order to be able to talk about orientation and supplemental education calls and things like that is beneficial. I have also found that anytime I've had a NAP staff person on an interview with me, their insight is really valuable. They often pick up things that I don't. And if I can have a NAP staff on an interview with me, I actually prefer it because it's just one more set of eyes helping me make a good decision. So you create your interview schedule in conjunction with the NAP staff person. You contact your interviewees, and you also contact the people you're not going to interview. And we do have email templates that we'll send out with the notes from this call. I also sent them out last month with the notes, which are like, there's a yes, we want to interview you template. There's a thank you for applying, but no, we will not be interviewing you. And then there's a template for your maybe pile, which I know I talked about last month, the people that maybe aren't your top pick, but you would consider them. And so you want to kind of keep them in a holding pattern, at least for a few weeks while you go through your initial interviews. And there's an email template for those people that basically says, we're still in process, we're holding on to your application for now, and we'll be getting back to you in a few weeks. So that gives you a little bit of a cushion if your top candidates all end up either kind of flaring out in the interview or end up taking other positions. And then some mentors do actually start interviewing as early as December 16th and 17th. You don't have to start interviewing by then, but I want to just flag that because there are often a handful of applicants who are really strong, and everyone who they apply to is really excited to talk to them. And so if you wait until after the holidays to even send out your emails about wanting to interview someone, you just are a little bit behind the curve on other mentors who may be actually doing first interviews before the winter holidays. So again, you don't have to start interviewing in December, And you can determine based on your schedule and your NAP staff schedule whether or not that's something you want to try to cram in at that time of year. This says January 3rd, but it's actually January 4th. By January 4th, you do need to contact everybody who applied to you with either that yes, no, or maybe email. This is a place where we've gotten a lot of criticism from applicants in the past when somebody falls through the cracks and they've applied and it gets to be the middle of January and they've never heard whether or not they're going to be interviewed or not. So it really is important for their peace of mind, as well as just for the sort of reputation of your ranch and the NAP program, to make sure that you do get those emails sent out by January 4th. Ideally, by January 15th, you've done your first interviews, if possible, and you're moving on to sort of your finalist round, where you've picked the top people, and you might give them a little bit more information. And we do recommend that people do a second interview. Sometimes mentors do a rather long interview for the first one. That's what George and I do at our ranch. And then our second interview is really just, are there any further questions? And a little bit more personal. Other mentors like to do a fairly short, streamlined interview as the first one, and then do a longer interview with their semifinalists. And again, by February 1st, people are often starting to make offers. So that's the basic timeline. And before I move on, I just want to see if we'll talk more about sort of interview scripts, scoring systems, talking to references here in a minute. But are there any questions at all or clarification needed on this timeline?
Julie?
Yeah, Bill.
Is there a limit on how early you can offer a job? You say you should make an offer by February 1st, if not earlier.
Yeah, you can make an offer earlier. You cannot make an offer before December 15th. That's kind of like once that December 15th date rolls, some mentors really just jump to it. And other mentors, for various reasons, wait. And I just as full disclosure, I think if you wait until January, sometimes your top candidate may have already gotten a job offer. What I will tell you is that if applicants have applied to multiple NAP sites, they usually wait to hear whether or not they're going to get an interview at every place they applied before they would accept an offer. And we've had that happen where we interviewed somebody for the first round before Christmas. It did the second interview the week between Christmas and New Year's, and we're ready to make a job offer in early January. And the person said, I'm very interested, but I also applied to 3 other ranches and I can't give you an answer yet because I want to go through my interviews with them. So yes, you can make the offer earlier. But we do ask you to go through this entire process. And I do recommend that you roll your NAP coordinator into conversation about whether or not a person is a good fit. Sometimes we've had this happen where someone that George or I were really thrilled about, like when we actually talked to the NAP coordinator or we talked to the references, we kind of ended up with a red flag. So, don't rush your process. But do know that people start making offers sometimes by the beginning of January. Yeah, Christy.
Morning. To your question, to your comment about them holding off or not wanting to accept, can you give them a deadline? Like if you need a decision and you want to maybe be able to offer to another candidate if they're going to say no, can you say, I understand that, but we still need an answer by the end of the week or something like that? I
think you can. That's a place where sometimes I think that the kind of murkiness between wanting to make sure that this process is sort of fair to all mentors as possible and all applicants, and yet ultimately each mentor is doing their own hiring. And if you are in a position where you actually really need a decision by January 15th, one way or the other, I think it's certainly okay to say that. And you might actually say that during that first interview, is just let them know what your timeline is. Because then if they are waiting to hear from another ranch, that gives them the opportunity to reach out to that other opportunity and say, hey, I'm on a tighter timeline. Can we bump up my interview or something? So I think that makes sense. Any other questions right now? Doesn't look like anybody else has their hand up. Okay. This is a point I can't stress enough, which is I really think that the more preparation we do for an interview, the more likely it is we're going to have an interview which is productive, not only for us, but for them. And so just to review these steps, and then we'll talk about some of these in more detail, is again, if you're in at a ranch or a farm where there are multiple people who are going to be supervising, or even just working closely and teaching skills to that person, it can be really beneficial for you to just get some input from them. That can look like anything from they're actually on the interview with you to you just soliciting from them specific questions they want you to ask in the interview. But one of the things, we have a relatively tight team here, and there are usually several people who are going to be training and working closely with the apprentice, and we gather input from everybody like that before we jump into the interview, just so we make sure that we're interviewing for someone that doesn't only work for us, for me personally, but it works for George, and it works for Sam, and it works for everybody else who's going to be working closely here. Make sure that you prepare a script, and we'll talk a little bit more about why a script is really important, and your scoring system. And I know I talked about the scoring system last time, that one of the things we do is we have a scoring sheet that we use as we read applications. And then we use that same scoring sheet during the interview, so that we kind of have all of the questions that we know we wanted to ask based on reading the application. We have them right in front of us during the interview, so we don't skip anything. It's good to figure out, particularly if you want to do a shorter interview as your first interview, say something around a half an hour. What is it that you absolutely have to learn about this person? Whether that's experience, whether that's flexibility, whether that's, do they have any prior commitments in the middle of the summer that they're going to want to have extra time off? Like, what's absolutely essential for you to learn, and make sure that you disclose information or have some questions that help you understand how to get that information. It's important that you create a script and a process that basically every candidate is going to go through. And so there are going to be questions that you ask everyone, like, or information you're going to communicate to everyone, like, this is our start date and this is our end date, and will those dates work for you? Or this is a job that requires, heavy lifting and working long days out in the sun, and I want to make sure that you understand what those ramifications are. So, and again, there are two reasons for having a process that you run everyone through. One of them is it just makes sure you don't skip steps. And two, this has never happened to us in our program, but if early on in the process, say 10 minutes in, you start to feel like, boy, this really isn't the right person for me. If you cut the interview short from what you're doing with everyone else, number one, you didn't give them a fair chance. And number two, if they wanted, they could come back and say legally, you did not give them the opportunity you gave everyone else. So having a script and a process that you're going to go through with everybody, even if in the first 10 minutes you realize they're not the right fit, that's protection for you. And it also, my experience is that it takes about 20 minutes for these people to kind of warm up and stop being terrified in the course of an interview. And you don't really start to get a sense of who the person is until you're about 20 minutes in. And so if you cut the interview short, this person might have been a gem. They might be exactly who you want, but you didn't give them enough time to demonstrate that to you. So don't cut it short. And then what are the questions that are specific to that candidate? So let's say that They mentioned in their resume that they did night calving one season, but they don't give you any details. Well, maybe you ask them a more detailed question. I see that you were, did the night watch for calving for a neighboring ranch. Could you tell me how many animals you were working with? What kinds of issues or problems might have arisen? What kind of sort of animal welfare or health or treatment did you have to do as a result of being in that position? So you can ask for more details in specific ways for specific candidates based on their application and resume. Plan for lots of time for their questions. I have been on interviews with mentors where the mentor gets so excited talking about their operation that they end up talking for most of the time. And ideally, it's at least a 50-50 split, that about 50% of the time you're asking questions or answering questions, and 50% of the time they are asking you. Remember, they're interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. So make sure to leave space for that. Don't oversell yourself. This can be something that we have done on our ranch, and I know other mentors sometimes fall into this, where you have a candidate you're really excited about and you really want them to choose you. And so you start to talk about all of the things that are so magnificent and marvelous and wonderful about your operation. And you kind of paint a little bit rosier of a picture than the reality. So just monitor yourself for that. And that's a place, again, where a script can really help you. And then if for any reason you're not used to using things like Zoom or Google Meets, definitely make sure that you practice that and that you set yourself up in a room where you've got a really good, strong internet connection. So those are just some of the sort of overview things. I'm going to go into a few more details now about some of this, but any questions or comments at the moment from anybody about all that? Okay, we'll move on. So I sent this out before, but just to remind you, these are the 2 score sheets that we make available to our mentors. These did go out last month, but they'll go out again in these notes. So the one that's much simpler, many fewer boxes, that's one that basically follows the application that the NAP apprentice candidates fill out: basic skills, resume, vision, experience, motivation, and creativity. And there's a place for you to sort of, if you use numerical ranking, there's a column for that, and then a place for you to put notes. And again, if you've used this in reviewing your applications, this is a place where you can make notes about, I need to ask this person more about X, Y, and Z. The one that's much more complicated is the one that George and I created for our ranch, actually, before we even started the NAP program. And it is the one that we continue to use. As you can tell, it's a much more detailed. We ask a lot of questions in our first interview. Our first interview always goes over an hour. That's just what works for us. We want to really learn everything we can about a person. And just because they score low in something doesn't mean they aren't going to be the person we pick. So I just wanted to show those things to you again, if they're useful for you, and you can certainly adapt them to the needs of your operation and your team. So basic interview process is to introduce yourself and the NAP coordinator, if you have one on the call with you. Then just very briefly discuss how your interview process is going to go, whether you're going to bounce back and forth between you asking questions, them asking questions, whether you want to open with them asking you questions. Whatever process you have decided upon, just make sure that you give them a really quick overview and see if they have any questions, just so that that kind of helps them settle in. Again, they're usually pretty nervous. We like to open with a get to know you question. For us, the question that we ask is, so, how did a nice kid who grew up in Brooklyn decide that they want to work on a ranch in the middle of nowhere, Colorado? So we like to open with a question which is kind of like, there's no wrong answer. And there are 2 reasons for that. One, we often learn something really important about what the deep motivation is about why this person wants to do this. And for us, that's a really important piece of information. in making a decision about who's going to thrive on our operation. The other thing is that this is a question that can really help them settle down. Like they already know the answer to this question on some level. And so they're not trying to kind of figure out what you're waiting to hear and getting all tied in knots about trying to prove to you who they are. And so this question often is one where you can just almost visibly see them calming down, settling into themselves. And then the rest of the interview tends to be sort of more honest and more friendly. There's often more laughter in it, and you really get a sense of who the person is. So I do recommend that you have some sort of kind of gentle opening question. When you're creating your questions in your script, try to avoid asking questions that they can, excuse me, answer with just a yes or no. Remember, you're trying to get as much detail as you can about who this person is, what their skill set is, what their interests are, so that you know whether they're a good fit for you. We always like to actually say right out in front at the very beginning of the interview, there is no stupid question. Please ask anything and everything you need to ask in order to understand whether or not what our operation is and the position we're offering is a good fit for what you're looking for. It's really important to tell them that they can ask anything. Sometimes people ask questions about how far we are from town. Sometimes they ask questions about work schedule. We just don't know. But again, it's really important for them to feel like they can find out what they need to know as well. We like to bounce back and forth. We usually will ask about 3 or 4 questions, kind of things about their experience and their education and their interests. And then we'll leave time for them to ask 3 or 4 questions, and we'll kind of bounce back and forth like that during the interview. So that's the process that works for us. Again, listen more than you talk, or equal. And then a lot of our mentors are starting to do background checks or social media checks on apprentices. And there's nothing illegal about that. But I did speak with our legal counsel about this. And the recommendation we received was, if you plan to do a background check or a social media check, it's good to just let them know that you're going to do that. And the language that was offered was, if I was to do a background check or look at your social media, is there anything I would see there that would, cause a question or a concern for me? And would you like to talk about that? So number one, that gives them the opportunity to explain that if they did have a DUI when they were 18, or if they did pose some rather silly pictures of themselves, a few years ago, it gives them the opportunity to say, yes, there was this time when X, Y, and Z was going on, and I've thought about it, so it gives them a chance to sort of explain that that's not who they are anymore, or that they realize that, those things could be worrisome to you. So, certainly feel free to do background and social media checks, but it is nice to be able to let them know you're going to do that. And then the basic tone that you're trying to set in the course of the interview is that your operation is a really great place. There's a lot to learn. There's a lot going on, and the work is hard. And that's striking that balance between being really proud and excited about sharing your operation with somebody, but also letting them know that it's probably going to be harder than they think. And again, that just helps them think clearly about what they're getting into. So things to cover in that first interview. These are the things that I think are really important to learn in that first interview. So not only what are you looking for, but what are they looking for? Are they looking for an opportunity to really learn a lot? And they want to learn a wide array of things on your ranch. That's an important thing to find out, because if the truth is that you're probably only going to sort of introduce them to a few aspects of your operation. So let's say that they're going to spend, 60% of their time basically fencing and 40% of their time with the livestock. And they tell you that they really want to learn about the business side of things. Well, maybe they're not the right person for you. So find out what they're really looking for, what they really want to learn, what kind of work experience they want. You might ask them, our application asks them a question about how do you see this apprenticeship fitting into your sort of overall career trajectory or professional and personal goals. You can ask them to talk more about that. Another thing is, what are they looking for in a mentor? What kind of teacher helps them thrive? Some of our mentors are very hands-on, some of them are very hands-off. And so asking sometimes what they're looking for in a mentor will also help you figure out, is this a person who's going to be a good fit for me and the way in which I know I'm a mentor? You can ask for details. We talked about that before. Asking them to explain further something that they've mentioned in their application. If they say they've taken a lot of workshops in holistic management, you can say, well, tell me more about the specifics of those workshops and what you learned. And that'll help you understand whether or not they basically took one online course or whether they actually did some field work. Ask them why they want to be an apprentice rather than an employee. That can be really useful. Definitely make sure you talk about your work schedule, how that changes seasonally. For a lot of these young people, unless they've worked on agricultural operations before, they don't understand that there are times of the year where the workday is long and times of the year when the workday is much shorter, and that there's a lot of fluctuation and there's a lot of unpredictability. So you might want to talk about that. Definitely make sure you discuss what kinds of basic duties they'll definitely do. One of the things a lot of our mentors talk about is that you don't necessarily know exactly what you're going to have them do until they show up and you get a sense of what kind of aptitude they have. Like some people may never be good with equipment. And so you're not going to put them on your expensive tractor or your ancient tractor that needs to be tenderly cared for, because they're just not paying attention to equipment. And after you've kind of had a couple of training sessions, you realize, not going to do it. But what are the things you definitely know you want them to do? And then you can discuss those and you can say, well, and depending on how things go, we might add in some other opportunities. So don't promise something that you're not absolutely sure you're going to be able to offer to them. You might talk about what kind of a teacher or mentor you are. If you have minimum requirements, do they have to know how to drive standard transmission? Are you willing to let them learn on site? Or if they don't know how to do it now, do they need to learn how to do that before they arrive? You might have noticed on applications, a lot of these young people actually don't know how to drive a standard transmission. Do they absolutely have to have horsemanship skills? So if there's something that basically you will not hire them if they don't already know how to do this, you might want to make sure you disclose that. Talk about your start and end date, compensation, days off. Can they have visitors? Our program requires that mentors provide housing and some sort of partial board. So discuss that. One of the biggest things we've heard for the 15 years of this program is that apprentices feel more isolated than they anticipate. And so you might want to talk about how far you are from town, how connected you are to your local community. You know, if they wanted to drive into town in order to go to church or synagogue or a coffee shop, how likely is that they can do that at the end of a work day? Or is that really something they'd have to do on a day off just because of distance? So those are some of the things that are really important to share with them. And then if you have deal breaker issues, some operations are completely non-smoking, including the housing. Some operations are fine if somebody wants to smoke in designated areas. Some operations have very strict visitor policies and pet policies, some don't. And firearms is another thing where there are some operations which are fine with an apprentice bringing a firearm. And so discussing the safety measures that you have for that might be something you'd want to talk about. Other operations don't let someone bring a working horse or a firearm or something. So if these are the things that I think are really valuable to try to incorporate. And as you can tell, if you're going to do all of those, probably a half an hour isn't long enough. So you might pick and choose from this list, depending on your situation, what you think is most important to cover in a first interview. So questions, thoughts, anything else people are thinking about? I'll talk a little bit more about a few more details, but I know I'm kind of fire hosing information at you, so I wanted to take a pause. Nothing at the moment. Okay, I'll keep going. So this is really an important point to bring up, and I think many of you are probably already aware of this, but programmatically, we need to make sure that mentors are aware of this, which is that there are what you could consider ill-advised questions. And so those are questions where you're starting to kind of creep up on what are considered federally protected classes. Depending on your state, there are additional protected classes in different states, but these ones that are here are the federal ones, which means that you cannot ask questions about these things. It's actually not a legal thing to do. So you can't ask somebody their age. The one caveat around that is that if somebody is younger than 18, obviously labor laws are different. So in our application, we do ask if somebody is 18 or older, and we also do ask them if they are legally able to work in the United States. So you can't really ask somebody where they're from, but you can ask them if they already are legal to work in the United States. And other than asking if somebody's 18 or older, you can't ask about age, and you can't ask a sneaky question like, when did you graduate from high school? More than likely, they've put that on their resume, so you can kind of gauge how old they are, but you can't come right out and ask a question about it. You can't ask about religion, gender identity, if they're pregnant or they have children, if they're married, or if they have a physical or mental disability. So the one about like physical challenges, I think, is one that's particularly difficult for us, given that we're hiring people who need to be very physically capable. They need to be strong. They need to deal with adverse weather. They need to be able to deal with allergens. And so you can't say, do you have a bad back, or have you had a recent injury? That would be crossing the line around this protected class situation. What you can do is be as detailed as possible about what the requirements are of your job. So you can say, for 3 months when you first get here and we're feeding hay, you are going to be bucking bales and feeding off hay for X number of hours every day, and this is how heavy the bales are. So you're giving them enough information so that if they do think that that's going to be physically challenging, they can choose to not come to your operation. That's the way it works. And I know that that can be really challenging for us because we really do need to gauge the physical capacity of somebody to do this work. So as part of that first interview, I strongly recommend that you try to think about what are the most physically demanding things about your operation. Is it allergens? Is it weight? Is it extreme weather? And just really kind of disclose fully some details around that. And again, you can't say, now that I've told you all of those things, do you think you can do it? That's crossing the line again. But what you can say is, I would like you to think about these things and make sure you feel confident in your ability to do them. That's as far as you can go. You can't actually ask them to confirm for you that they can do it. The other thing that I think has come up a few times is if somebody is married or has a significant other partner, or has children, you can't ask about that, but if they mention it, I know this has been an issue for some of our mentors because some of them have housing which is adequate for someone to bring a partner or a family, and other mentors really don't. It's a fifth wheel trailer, or the housing is shared with another employee. So you just have to say, you know, my housing doesn't accommodate you having anybody come with you. So you can't not hire them based on the fact that they're married or children, but you can say that your housing isn't adequate for that. And then if they are in a position where they want to bring somebody with them and that's not possible because your housing doesn't provide it, that kind of sort of answers that question usually. This is a little bit of a gray area, and we've been talking about how to deal with the fact that somebody might feel like they were discriminated against because they had children or were married, because your housing can't accommodate that. So I don't have the best answer around that right now. I'm trying to get some more details. So if this is a concern for you, you know, please reach out to me directly and we can talk more. I know it is for another mentor who was on the call on Tuesday. So if this is an issue, please let me know and we can talk further about how to sort of address this issue in the course of your interviewing. So I'm going to pause here because I think this one in particular is one that can sometimes be a little challenging for people to figure out, well, how do I find out what I need to know when I can't ask a question about it? One of the things I can share is that, and I have some language about this that will go out in the notes about when you're talking to a reference, how you can ask a question about, like, was this person unable to perform their duties consistently and accurately? Were they late a lot? Did you find that you had to give them a lot of additional time off? Again, like those, if they say yes to any of those, it doesn't really matter why. It doesn't matter whether the person was having a mental health challenge or was having a physical health challenge. The important information is that this person wasn't able to be reliable as a worker to show up when they needed to be there. That's the reason you can choose not to hire them, not the reason why they were unable to show up. Is that, I know that's kind of like a splitting hairs, but is that clear, the distinction between the reason why they couldn't come and the fact that they couldn't come? The fact that they couldn't come means you don't think that they're reliable enough for you. It doesn't matter why they aren't reliable. And again, if anybody wants to talk about that further, I'm happy to hop on a call or do some email in order to kind of suss this out. This is information I've gotten actually from the National Network of Agricultural Apprenticeships and Farm Incubator Programs. So this is how programs nationally are trying to deal with this question. And I'm happy to talk further with anybody about it. So there aren't any questions right now.
Julie,
Yeah.
can you repeat how you worded, and maybe it wasn't a question. I guess maybe that's the part that I'm trying to cement in my mind. You talked about going through the detail, what a really rough work day might be, or 3 months of bucking hay and allergens and lifting 50 pounds or whatever, all those kinds of things. And then at the end, I think maybe your example, you didn't actually ask, said, I need you to think about how confident you are.
Yeah. You can, they can't answer the question. Like you can't say, can you do this? Or is this a concern for you? What you can do is say, this is extremely demanding. I'm telling you these details, and I'd like you to definitely consider these things closely as you reflect on whether this is a position that's a good fit for you or not. Like that's the way you can do it. It's basically you leave it in their ball court to determine whether or not they're capable.
Right.
I think another thing you can say is, like, if you're an operation which runs a lot of head of livestock, and so the death loss on a given year can be, emotionally challenging, think you could say that. You could say, we've had some blizzards here where we ended up losing a lot of animals, and it's really difficult. And I just want you to know that, some years the death loss isn't great, and some years the death loss is pretty overwhelming. And that usually takes some adjusting. So, definitely think about that. So that's the distinction. Did that clarify that for you, Jim?
Yes, I think so. Thanks.
Okay. All right. And again, I'm happy to talk further about like crafting like a specific way in your interview script where you would ask that. Yeah, Bill?
I've struggled with some of these restrictions on what we can ask.
Yep.
Because we've had employees who, we had one guy who had Crohn's disease, and he spent a lot of time throwing up. It's unfair to him and unfair to us not to know that he had a physical condition that didn't allow him to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
And we had another young woman who we know, who applied for a job, and we probably would have offered it to her. And then her dad came over and said, she just found out she's 3 months pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, a 6 months job. So it would have been challenging at the end of that 6 months. But, some of those things you really need to know.
I know. This is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
It's really challenging. And so again, like you can say things like, in the course of the 8 months, there will be periods of time where X is what you're being asked to do physically. If someone knows they're pregnant, they ideally know that they shouldn't take that job. And we've had that happen where somebody applied, they were going to be offered the position, they found out they were pregnant, and so they declined. Like they pulled themselves out once they realized that this was actually medically unwise for them. And so this is the place where I agree with you entirely. Like, it seems like, wouldn't it just be easier if we could just ask? And the way the law sees it is that if somebody has, let's say somebody is someone who has allergies, but they are able to control it with medication, they shouldn't be denied an opportunity to have a job because they have allergies, as long as they can control them and they don't impact their work. And so the opportunity to determine whether or not you're capable rests with the individual, not with the person doing it. And so but I agree, which is why I think the more detailed you can be about real specific things, and ideally, if somebody knows they have a physical condition, they're going to disclose it to you. My experience is that they usually don't.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. But once they really hear about how demanding and difficult the job is, a lot of people will then withdraw. Like, they won't come right out in the interview and say, oh boy, that's not going to work for me. But they go back and they think about it. But I agree, like, there is the risk of hiring somebody who ends up not being able. Yeah, there's no easy way around this without being able to do an on-site work interview, which is what a lot of operations have done across the country. We used to try to do that as part of NAP, and now that we have applicants from all over, the expense of trying to fly them in someplace for a day, like, we don't have the budget to support them or you with doing that. So, individual mentors might choose to do that, but we can't require it programmatically because we can't support it financially. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you. It's kind of a not great answer, but that is the reality. So just get really clear about how hard your job is. That's the best we can do right now. And I'm happy to talk with you more, Bill, if you want, about kind of how to design, how to craft your interviews so you feel like you you really help people understand the demands. Like you
Yeah.
can say things like, there will be times when you are away from any kind of inside shelter or bathroom for 12 hours. Like you can say that. And then if somebody knows that's going to be a problem for them, they will choose not to do that. So you can think about those kinds of things.
And how many operations do have in-person interviews right at the end?
I think very few now. I think the operations that are hiring somebody who's more or less local, like they have an applicant who's somebody who can drive there for the day, have done that. But a lot of our applicants are applying from, many states away from where they want to be. So you can offer that if you want, but we can't require it as a program. And so some mentors, because they feel that's so important, they're really trying to hire people who are much more local, and they're really, and I know it particularly up in Montana, Luca and Hayden, the coordinators up there, did a lot of local outreach in order to try to get more people in the state of Montana applying to Montana locations, in order to make it a little bit more possible for somebody to come for a work visit. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up here because I know I only have a few minutes left. But like I said, if anybody wants to talk about any of this further, just send me an email. I'm happy to jump on a call with you and we can suss out more details as needed. So just really quickly, there'll be a document that goes out with these notes. But, when I was talking about the script, I was saying there might be questions that you ask everybody, like, can you start here? Can you lift 50 pounds? Whatever. Can you, work on Sundays? These are questions that are more based on what you see in the application or the resume. When somebody mentions something, but you don't really have enough detail to really understand their skill level or their interest level, these are just some questions, the kinds of questions you can create to learn more information. So, for example, a lot of apprentices may have been on sports teams or have played instruments or have some sort of experience which demonstrates commitment. And the longevity of commitment, to be on a team for a number of years or play an instrument for a number of years. And you might want to ask about, like, what was it that helped them have that stick-to-itiveness? So you could ask a question like about the football team. What did you like best about being part of a team? What was hard, and how do you feel you contributed? If you're a mentor location where you work closely as a team, you might want to ask a question like that. Or somebody in their application might say, I'm really interested in high density grazing, but they don't say anything more. Like, so are they just using a buzzword because they figured you'd want to read that? Or do they actually really legitimately have an interest in that? So you could ask a question saying, I see that you mentioned that you're really interested in this. Can you tell me what you do know about it? And it may be that they listened to 2 podcasts. It may be that they went to a workshop. And, that will help you to determine whether that really is something that they're interested in or not. So like I said, there'll be a document that goes out with these notes that has several examples of these kinds of questions that can help you craft your interview. Again, I'm just going to review this really quickly. Do call references. I know some mentors have sometimes feel like they don't need to get another opinion. I have found it really valuable. There've been 1 or 2 times when I thought I knew who our top candidate was, and I called a reference, and I realized that there were some things I wasn't so sure about after talking to the reference. So this will also go out in the notes, so I won't belabor it right now. But, you just reach out to the reference, let them know how long, whether you're doing it by email or by trying to set up a phone conversation. And then create your questions so that you're respectful of their time. Let them know that the person is applying for an educational experience, not just a job. That actually can really help you get sort of more thorough information if they know that you're looking for somebody who wants to learn, not somebody who already knows how to do it all. And then these are just some of the questions that can be really valuable. One of them that I really like is the one that's second to the last. And this is one, again, where you can learn a lot about kind of what is it going to be that's going to make this person a good fit for you or not. If this person came to work on my farm or ranch, how do I set them up for success? That's the kind of question you can ask where you'll learn a little bit about what kind of learner is this? You know, do they need to have things repeated? Do they need to have things shown to them often? Are they someone who actually needs you to once a week tell them what they did well, so that when they hear criticism, they're more able to take it? So again, these questions will go out with the notes. And then just lastly, and I'll try to leave a little room, I know we're almost out of time, is just in our program, we do recommend that you do 2 interviews, that you do a first interview, whether it's long or short. Then you pick your finalists, usually no more than 3, and reach out to them again and say you want to set up a second interview. Often they have more questions for you. During that first interview, they can be really nervous and they may not remember all of their questions. So that second interview gives them a chance, and they often feel a little bit more comfortable asking questions like, can I bring my dog? Or we have a family wedding in July, and I know that's a bad time of year to leave, but would it be possible for me to be gone for 4 days? So you might learn some things during that second interview that are really important. If you didn't cover things like about how this fits into their long-term goals, that second interview is an opportunity to do that. Make sure to review your compensation package and any ranch policies that are really important for them to know. One of the reasons for that is you want them to make sure that if they accept the job, excuse me, they know exactly, what they're agreeing to. And I really like it to be a little more informal, and we'll tell stories about a couple of really hard days that now, in retrospect, when we talk about them, they're funny, but in the moment, it was kind of hard. And talking about some of the things we really love about our work. Just trying to kind of create that more personal connection. They learn a little bit more about us, what we'd be like to work with. So that second interview, again, can be long or short, but it's really usually, sometimes you really learn really critically important things during that. And then once you've done that, you're in a position to be able to make decisions about who you want to hire. And again, in those email templates that will go out with these notes, there will be a sample email that you would send to the person that you want to offer the job to. And there will be a sample email about thank you for your interview. Thank you for all your time and energy, but we have chosen someone else. So we're trying to make it easy for you to make sure that you do that communicating with everybody who applies to you. So I know we're at time. In fact, a minute over. I'm happy to stay on if anybody needs to stay on. I can stay on for a few minutes and talk about something. And like I said, I'm also happy to set up a separate time to cover any details. I know this call has a lot of information in it. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie.